Hey guys, I wanted to make this video to share my thoughts from experience about the shadow, the psychological phenomenon of the shadow and what it does to our lives, our personality, and what we can do with it. To start off, for those of you who don't know, the shadow is a term used in Jungian psychology to refer to the part of our personality that we would rather deny or not be conscious of. So, obviously, these are negative aspects of the personality. Naturally, as humans, we like to think that we are good and that we are awesome. So, we only like to recognize the parts of ourselves that speak that truth. But the shadow is, and I think as humans, we also all have a shadow. The shadow is the things of your personality that would contradict that statement. So, how do you recognize your own shadow? I think only a small amount of self-reflection and meditation is necessary to become conscious of your shadow, or at least the presence of it. And I think a good place to start is by just asking the question, am I a good person? And at first, you will obviously come up with all the aspects of yourself that speak that truth. But afterwards, you will bring up the parts of yourself that also contradict it. So it's basically the parts of your personality that speak, I'm not a good person, I am a horrible person, I am, any negative trait. So those negative traits could be egoism, aggression, shame, neediness, selfishness, apathy, indifference, lustfulness, etc. So any personality trait that would be defined as negative, at least in the eyes of moral society. And I think recognizing that part of ourselves is really important in our evolution, in our growth, because what most of us do is repress the shadow, the negative personality traits. And by repressing, what I mean is we push them out of consciousness to the point where they submerge into the unconscious and we are no longer aware of them. So an example of this could be maybe a guy who, as a child, would express a lot of traits or actions that would indicate aggression, but since teachers, parents, society, friends would eventually show him that this aggression is bad, he starts to repress it, and he represses it to the point where it's no longer conscious. And maybe he's in his 20s now, and he's this guy who pretends to always be nice and always treat others nice, and that he's never aggressive or never gets mad and stuff like this, until something happens that releases all that unconscious shadow material in the form of aggression. And it could be something you do that makes you not recognize yourself or makes you question whether you're really a good person. And these types of explosive reactions, I think, are basically what we see in the news as family members that harm their loved ones or their spouses, or people that commit crimes, or murderers, or I think aggression can also be turned from others to yourself. and expresses itself in the form of self-hate and suicide. Uh, and it's a serious topic because by repressing the shadow material, it basically takes a life of its own, and it could cause really devastating consequences to your relationships and to your life in general. So, what can you do about it? Carl Jung would say that in order to become whole individuals, we don't imagine figures of light, but we actually do the work of making the darkness conscious. And I think this is the truth of what we should do with that dark part of ourselves. We don't deny it, we don't repress it and take it out of consciousness, because that just pushes it out of the picture and makes you be controlled by it through the unconscious, almost like a puppet. What you should do is basically, through introspection, recognize your own shadow and then integrate it into your personality. So, what does integration mean in Jungian terms? Integration would basically be first identifying those traits of your personality and then putting them in the same toolbox that you would put the conscious traits of your personality. Obviously, the ones that make you think you're a good person, an awesome person. And these traits could be like creativity, it could be friendliness, it could be confidence, etc. And by putting in the same toolbox as all these positive traits, your negative traits, so you could put in it your neediness, your lustfulness, your aggression, your resentfulness, you're basically now at least seeing it for what it is, and then you can do the work of expressing that emotion in a way that's not going to be self-destructive to your life. So maybe your dependence on things, which is basically neediness, you've been expressing it as an addiction with a substance, or an addiction with an ideology, or a codependence with a specific person. And these are obviously all not healthy ways to express that dependence. And basically, by integrating dependence, what you would do is not get rid of it, but actually choosing to become dependent with things that you know will actually benefit you. So it could be as simple as an addiction to working out. You know, there's many people that if they don't work out 5 times a week, they feel horrible and they feel shameful. And at least by doing this, you're focusing your dependence in something that's actually constructive in your life. It could also be one of the best dependencies I think out there is a dependence on a creative outlet, because that's something that really enriches your life and your person. And so, yeah, that's just one example of it. You could also, for example, take aggression, and instead of expressing it through doing harm unto others or being passively aggressive with loved ones and self-hatred, you could display it through maybe a martial art, maybe boxing, maybe weightlifting. You could also express it through being more assertive with people. So being more assertive with people is different from being aggressive, because being more assertive is actually going for what you want and not being afraid of being disrespected, but holding your ground with people. And I think this comes from that internal aggression, which is a part of our shadow. So, to sum that up, shadow work is basically turning the traits that would basically speak the truth that you're a bad person or that you can be a toxic person, and learning how to turn these traits into your favor so that they help enrich your life and grow as a person. And I think shadow work is one of the most important aspects of psychological maturity and just evolving as people, because the truth is everyone has a shadow, and brave are those that choose to admit their shadow and recognize it and not be ashamed of it, but actually choosing to confront it and work with it. Um, and I think, on a last thought, that the shadow, when not integrated and repressed, can be a source of great suffering, um, because more and more today, illnesses such as depression or anxiety can come, I think, from repressed shadow material. Depression is caused by repressed emotion. It's like a clog in your person of unexpressed emotion, um, which then sort of makes you freeze and not be able to appreciate life anymore, and and you can only get out of it through letting the emotion out. And it's the same thing with the shadow. You cannot repress it, you cannot hold it down in the unconscious, but you have to bring it up to consciousness and express it in a healthy way. Shadow work, I think, is especially important for men, because men are uh, naturally more prone to express aggression. And I think the best example of this aspect of men is not even how they cause a lot of crimes and displays of aggression, but in suicide rates. So it's crazy how suicide causes more deaths per year than natural disasters and violence combined. So in this world we live in, more people are killing themselves than people killing each other or through natural disasters. And 70% of suicides worldwide are from men. And and this is very interesting, because I think men naturally incline themselves to repress emotion and shadow material because of the demands of society. Most men, besides not wanting to appear weak or uh, trying to conform to a role in society, they sacrifice this integration aspect. This can be a cause of great self-hatred, because by not working with the shadow, it produces explosive reactions in yourself that can ruin relationships um, and harm your life and yourself. And then this causes depression and shame, and at the end of that road, if you don't recover and if you don't face what's happening inside of you, it leads to suicide. And I think it speaks a lot that 70% of suicides worldwide come from males. Um, in Native American traditions or Aboriginal traditions, most men have what is called a rite of passage. So after we turn a certain age, it could be 18 years old, it could be 20 years old. Basically, the elder men or um, the older men give the younger men who are about to become adults a sort of test or a sort of ordeal they have to go through in order to prove themselves that they are ready for the responsibilities of being an individualized adult. And I think a good example of one of these is tribes that force young males to live on their own in the wilderness for about a week or two. And I think this is an extreme example, but what they did is basically throw them out on their own. And if they survive the ordeal of being in the woods and uh, surviving by their own means, and they come back to the tribe, then they are greeted with celebration, and basically they fulfill the rite of passage and become an adult and a leader of the tribe. And that's an extreme example, but I think in our modern society, we don't have a rite of passage. I mean, the closest thing you can think of as a rite of passage in this society is, high school graduation, which is, a really, really good accomplishment. But I think what men are missing is more things that test themselves, more things that make them vulnerable and forces the shadow to come out. And I think suffering can be the perfect rite of passage. The loss of a loved one, or an accident you have, or the loss of a relationship can produce the suffering necessary to initiate the shadow work and basically develop more emotional maturity. So, yeah, that's basically my all of my thoughts about the shadow. So to sum it up, it's just all the dark, negative personality traits that we each have as individuals, and working with it, turning it in your favor. Basically, uh, making the demons that taunted you your whole life into your best friends, and making them benefit you and work for you. And I think the result of it is actually becoming a great human being. I think the most enlightened human beings and the most kind human beings are the ones that are aware and conscious of all the harm they can do, and consciously decide not to do it and decide to turn it into something positive. Because if we are not aware of the shadow, it takes a life of its own and it turns on us. And that's just a truth of the way our minds work. So that's it. I hope this helps anyone who saw this, and makes you reflect on your own shadow and maybe work you can do to improve your personality and as a result improve your life. So thank you for watching.